Tales from the Crypt, Demon Night, Chapter 5. It was only 10 minutes later that the doorbell chimed again. In the kitchen, on her knees, wearing a pair of orange rubber gloves, with her hair falling across her eyes, Geraldine was performing step 1 of the oven cleaning task Irene had demanded earlier. She had hauled the racks out and hosed down the insides of the old Kenmore 4-burner with oven cleaner, which smelled, she supposed, no different than the goop at the bottom of a toxic waste dump. Now, with the fumes making her blink and squint, she was scraping off the hideous yellow foam with a broad putty knife. Fun? Oh yeah, she was ecstatic. The mission inn's doorbell rang again. Glad for any diversion, Geraldine used it as an excuse to leave the kitchen, as well as to give her lungs a reprieve from the chemical mix that was frying them. Irene was at the door already, and standing out under the awning with their clothes getting whipped into crazy shapes by the wind, were County Sheriff Tupper, a deputy she did not know, and a cowboy wearing an ankle-length yellow duster that flapped in the storm. Irene ushered them in and pressed the door shut. Breaker was already on his feet with his hand in his pocket. It was then that Geraldine got the whole picture. Roach had called the cops. For this, Breaker Man was the would-be car thief. It softened her opinion of him somewhat. She wasn't the only one here with a record. She stepped closer to the table to pick up the bowl and glass before a fight could break out, because if Breaker was anything like herself, he would not be taken easily. Sheriff Tupper said his highs and howdies to Irene and Uncle Willie and Little Wally, even included Geraldine at the end, and wiped the congenial smile off his pudgy face. He frowned and looked at the ceiling. So did everyone else. Overhead, Cordelia's bed was bouncing and squeaking at a steady pace, interspersed by an occasional breathy moan. "Sounds like Cordelia's hard at work," he grunted. The cowboy took off his big hat and dropped it on the empty flower pot by the door. Then he decided better of it and placed it back on his head. His face was hard and wooden as he locked eyes with Breaker. In his eyes, Geraldine saw contempt and hatred that had probably festered there for a long, long time. Breaker matched his stare, but a tinge of uncertainty colored his expression. She guessed a federal marshal and a big-time crook. "Would you be Mr. Breaker?" Tupper asked, hooking his thumbs under his Sam Brown belt. The cowboy nodded. He would most definitely be Mr. Breaker. Breaker whipped his hand out of his jacket. Something clicked metallically. Presto, he had an open butterfly knife in his hand. And another presto, he had jumped at Geraldine and hooked an arm around her neck. God, he moves fast, she thought dazedly, and felt the tip of his knife press against the soft area under her chin. The bowl and glass fell from her hands and shattered on the floor like two small bombs. Irene let out a shriek and backed into a corner with her fist mashed against her mouth. "No guns or she dies," he barked in Geraldine's ear. Get them out of your belts, now!" "Now you looky here," Tupper said. "Nobody needs to be doing any shooting. Breaker, let Geraldine go, and it won't be mentioned anymore. You're in enough trouble already, son, if what we've heard is true." "No way," Breaker said. He was sweating and shaking as he gripped Geraldine tighter. He had, she noticed, a mild case of B.O., and no wonder, wearing dirty clothes around and all. He lowered the knife enough to press it hard against her throat. "Drop those guns, or I kill her. Simple as that, simple as that." The cowboy stepped forward. "Sheriff, this man does not have the guts to kill anyone, I assure you." "Hold it!" Tupper shouted at him. "I'm the negotiator here." "But there are no negotiations needed. Can't you understand? I can simply walk up and take the knife from him." "Freeze, mister! Nobody said you had any authority here, and leaving the scene of an accident is a breach of the law in this state, so both of you have things to worry about." The salesman groaned aloud. He stepped back. "Fine, good, whatever. Do your duty. I just want my merchandise back, okay?" Tupper turned his attention back to Breaker. Geraldine was aware of a strange sense of calm, or perhaps a sense of doom, wafting through her mind. Life had kicked her around a lot, and to die with her throat cut would be a fine capper for a miserable, hopeless existence. She had, for a while as a teenager, dabbed around with the idea of reincarnation, of dying and being born again as someone else. But with her luck, she had decided long ago, she would come back as her own unlucky self and have to wind up in prison again. Imagine that, endlessly repeating your own life. That would be a real, eternal, and inescapable hell. "Now, Mr. Breaker," Tupper said evenly, "I want you to put that knife down. There's no need to spill blood over an attempted theft of a beat-up old Bronco. Do as I say and let the girl go." Bob Martell, who had remained mute since arriving, perked up. "Asshole," he growled. "Are you deaf or just stupid? Drop it." Tupper made a motion. "Shut up." "Breaker, put down the goddamn knife." Geraldine felt every muscle in Breaker's chest and arm become so tight that they were nearly humming, like high-powered electric wires. "Her blood is on your head," he grunted at Tupper and raked the knife across her throat. She heard herself, to her own surprise, scream. Over in the corner by the stairs, Irene screamed as well. Breaker dropped Geraldine, and she thudded heavily to her hands and knees, choking on air. She put her hands to her throat. Nothing. She raised herself up on her knees and saw that Breaker had lowered his head. She reached up and easily pulled the butterfly knife out of his hand. "I got him," Tupper shouted and thundered over, with the old floorboard squeaking and groaning under his massive weight. Geraldine rose up and staggered to the table, still clutching her throat with one hand, unable to believe that any of this had happened, unable to believe that she was not dead on the floor. Sheriff Tupper jerked Breaker's arms behind his back and rapidly snapped a set of handcuffs over his wrists. "Excuse me, honey," he said to Geraldine, and pushed her out of the way. He took a handful of the back of Breaker's head and mashed his face to the table, simultaneously kicking his feet apart. He patted them down from top to bottom, jerked out his roll of money, then worked his way back up. "Missed it the first time," he said to himself, got Breaker upright again, and jerked something out of his shirt. Geraldine saw that it was a small and tattered leather pouch on a cord around his neck. The cowboy, Geraldine remembered that Tupper had been calling him the salesman, nodded at Tupper. "I believe you'll find the stolen item in there, Sheriff." He took a step, but Breaker immediately squalled a protest. "You keep that bastard away from me! I mean it!" "Get yourself calm," Tupper snapped, breathing hard. He pawed through the pouch. "Nothing, it's empty." It simply can't be," the salesman said. Tupper let the pouch drop. He laid the roll of money on the table, shaking his head. "Salesman, who in the hell are you exactly?" "I work for a collection agency. I repossess stolen artifacts, antiques, like I told you." "So you buy and sell antiques and chase down people who rob your store? Couldn't the police back east do that? So you don't have to spend half your life on the road?" The salesman formed his hands into fists and began knocking his knuckles against each other. "The antique is somewhere in this building. It is made of bone and iron, is studded with silver rivets and mystic symbols, and was cast in the shape of a large key that is as big as your hand, an old skeleton-style key. Its value is inestimable, Sheriff. For your benefit, that means expensive." "Thank you," Tupper said coldly. The salesman reached into one of the huge pockets of his duster coat and withdrew a battered leather case about the size of a lunchbox. He flipped the latches and levered it open. The inside, Geraldine saw, was made of darkly ancient wood, where an indentation shaped like a huge key had been carved out. Formed into the head of it was an odd bulge, as if a gigantic pearl should be part of the ensemble. "A piece of antiquity," the salesman said, snapping it shut. "Breaker has hidden it nearby. I guarantee it." Tupper nodded. "Bob," he called. "Yo, Bob!" The deputy had wandered to a window and was standing there like a mannequin, watching the storm. He turned. "What?" "Get those damn sunglasses off for a change," Tupper snapped at him. "Go upstairs and check the room for that key thing." "Key thing?" He peeled his glasses slowly off and stood befuddled. Though Geraldine had never met him before, it seemed that the man was into drugs of some sort. Shots, pills, nose candy, whatever. He looked at the salesman and blinked a few times. "The key?" he said and snapped his fingers. "Sure thing, boss." He charged up the stairs. "It's number 5, Irene called to him. Somewhere along the line, she had gotten herself behind the desk and was still crouched there. As Geraldine watched, she slowly rose up. A head, a pair of shoulders, a set of breasts, a waistline, all of it, hidden from the neck down behind cheap green fabric cut in the style long since abandoned. "You asshole," she hissed suddenly. She was looking at Breaker. "And to think I let you stay." The salesman strode up to Tupper. "I must have the key. I must have it," he demanded. "And you must get your breath out of my face," Tupper snapped back. He moved his attention to Breaker. "Tell me where it is, Breaker." "I don't even know what you're talking about," he answered. Tupper mashed his face to the table once more. "Speak, Breaker, or I'll see you in prison for taking Geraldine hostage. It's a very big crime nowadays, even out here in the sticks and boonies." Breaker struggled, but not much. "I don't know," he pushed out. "None of this." Tupper looked up. "Geraldine, you all right?" She had been wandering around in small circles and stopped now. "Huh?" "Call Mavis Dornberry at headquarters in Junction City, could you? I want everything she can find on a..." He raised Breaker erect again. "Got a first name, middle initial?" Breaker remained silent. The jaw muscles in his temples bulged in and out as he worked his teeth against each other. Tupper patted a hand against his back pockets, left, right, left. "Still no wallet. Just get Mavis the name Breaker. Have her run it through... I know it's an odd name. She might find something. It's Brayker. "No problem," Geraldine said, and went to the desk. The salesman, who seemed perfectly happy not to have a name at all, stalked over to where Wally Infield and Uncle Willie were sitting in front of the television, which was now persuading them to buy a new type of soap called Fresh Splash. Not that they were interested in it at all. Wally was mesmerized by the police activity. Uncle Willie, perhaps remembering one or two of his dozens of run-ins with the local constabulary, was shrunken into the sofa a la Wally and was watching the commercial with all the intensity of a medical student witnessing his first brain surgery. The salesman spoke. "Idiots," he muttered. When he turned, Uncle Willie let his gaze creep up to watch him. Something across the room had just caught the salesman's attention. The salesman hurried over to where Tupper was allowing Breaker to sit at the table. "Under there," the salesman announced, pointing. "I've figured it out by now." Tupper touched a finger to his forehead. "Say what?" "There, a little ledge under the perimeter of the table. He hid the key there when we came in." "Is that so?" Tupper looked tired of the whole affair. "Give me a second." He bent over and felt under the lower edge of the table, grunting against the pressure of his ample stomach as his belt cut into it. His face turned a definite red. "Whoa!" he blurted suddenly. "We've got something here." Faintly, something clunked. Tupper backed up and rose to his feet. "Bingo!" he wheezed and held it up. An ornamental key. Uncle Willie, looking at it, had one distinct thought. "Big fucking deal." It was made out of some kind of pounded metal and looked to be worth about 22 cents at a recycling place, if you were lucky. The guy they were calling salesman clicked open his little leather case. "Sheriff," he said, "be so kind as to put it in here, would you?" Tupper eyeballed the key, shook it in his hand while he recovered his breath. "There's some kind of glass ball toward the top," he said, "about half full of dark stuff." He swished it around, holding it to the light. "Looks like maple syrup." Feet clopped on the stairs. "Didn't find nothing in room 5, Martell blared, and grinned his famous monkey grin. "Caught me a whore and her John in the act, though. It's a 3-way bust tonight, boss." Behind him were Cordelia and Roach, their clothes ruffled and off-kilter. Roach's face smeary with red lipstick, his shoes untied. Cordelia's extensive makeup had been smeared around and she was barefoot. And as mad Uncle Willie could see as he watched them descend, as a hornet stuck on hot flypaper. "Sheriff Tupper," Cordelia brayed as she reached the landing, "I will not tolerate this kind of treatment from your deputy. You and I have known each other since the get-go. We have been more than friends on occasion. Kindly inform your stormtrooper that we have an agreement."
Geez, Bob," Tupper groaned. "Leave these good folks alone."
The salesman cleared his throat. "Sheriff, dump that crap out of the orb and put the key in the case, won't you now? And I'll be on my way." Tupper glanced at him.
"Orb? Oh yeah. You're a hotshot antique dealer from back east, and you'll be on your way on foot in a thunderstorm. No car, no map or nothing to guide you back to New York or wherever the fuck you came from. Mister, you are as strange as a man as Breaker ever will be, and you are not going nowheres until this whole damn mess is figured out. Geraldine!" She was gone. A length of curly telephone wire led from the front desk, over the top of the nearest door and into the kitchen. She appeared and waved a hand, meaning, "Hold your horses, Sheriff. I'll be done in a minute." At least to Uncle Willie's way of deciphering things. Tupper cursed softly. "Deputy, take Mr. Breaker here out to the car."
Martell moved to take control of Breaker, who began to twist and struggle as Tupper started to put the key in its case.
"Don't do it!" he shouted. "You don't know what will happen. What's at stake?"
"He's simply insane," the salesman said. "This is obviously the receptacle for the artifact, and I am obviously its owner." Geraldine strode out of the kitchen with the phone in her hand. "Mavis has a line through to the CrimeNet computer, but the only Breaker they show was a petty thief who died 4 years ago." Tupper scowled.
"Wouldn't you know? Okay, Bob, get his ass to the car. As far as we know, he has no priors, but attempted auto theft is a good start."
He turned to the salesman and extended the key.
"Here it is."
"You can't give him that," Breaker said. "He's not who he says he is." The salesman had taken a step backward.
"Well," Tupper demanded, "you want it or not?"
Just place it in the case for me." Tupper narrowed his eyes.
"What? You can't touch it? Maybe you don't want your fingerprints on it."
That's simply absurd, Sheriff. Simply absurd."
"Then take it. You can wipe your prints off later."
He hesitated.
"Geraldine," Tupper said, "keep Mavis on the line. Salesman, let's see some identification."
The salesman looked from face to face, grinning limply. "Are you mad, Sheriff? You think that I'm—"
"I don't think nothing yet," Tupper interrupted. "But if you think I'm mad now, just keep on stalling."
The salesman's grin vanished. "Very well." He snapped the case shut and set it on the floor. "The time for stalling is definitely over." Geraldine was just lifting the phone to her ears again to tell Mavis to get ready for more information, when the salesman straightened and his right fist shot out towards Tupper in an instantaneous whipping blur. It was in that millisecond that Geraldine realized with the speed of sudden, unvoiced recognition that Breaker was indeed a part of her destiny, of the destinies of everyone present at the Mission Inn on this howling night. The salesman's fist clove Tupper's face in half, passed on through his brain, and with a hideous squelching noise, exploded out the back of his head. Blood and clots of matter sprayed in a sudden wash across Breaker and Deputy Martell. Cordelia and Irene both screamed in unison, as did Roach, whose tone added a horrible contralto effect. Little Wally's mouth fell open, and he fainted across Uncle Willie's lap. Uncle Willie himself had become a statue with a scraggly beard and huge frozen eyes. The phone dropped from Geraldine's suddenly nerveless fingers and clunked on the floor. The twitching body of Sheriff Tupper hung from the salesman's arm. The salesman tried to shake it free. "Get me out of these cuffs, now!" Breaker shouted at Martell, but Martell was doing an Uncle Willie imitation without the beard. "Damn it!" Breaker howled. "Geraldine, help me!" She stared at him. Between her feet, Mavis's voice on the phone was a tiny buzzing. "Geraldine!" Breaker shouted, his teeth clenched, his bloody face drawn up. "He'll kill us all if you don't move!" She blinked at him. Her mind could not unscramble the sounds he was making. The salesman had Tupper's body on the floor now, and had a foot on his shoulder, still trying to jerk his hand out of the mangle of meat and shards of bone that had been Tupper's head. The antique key had fallen from Tupper's hand when he died, and now Breaker stepped to it, and kicked it under the table. Moving backward, he got to Martell and tried to open a patch on his belt that looked likely to hold keys. Geraldine watched all this from the safety of her senseless, dreamy world.
God damn you, Geraldine! Breaker shrieked. Move your big fat fucking ass!
She jerked. Her ass was not big. She had been told by many a man that her ass was to die for. So gorgeous was it. She unlocked her body and skirted the desk. "You're a jerk," she snarled in Breaker's face, and dug Martell's official set of keys out of the pouch. She pawed through them, found the smallest one, and unlocked the cuffs. Breaker twisted out of them just as the salesman's hand pulled free. The salesman then swung his fist in a huge arc, catching Breaker only slightly as he ducked. Martell finally came to life, with the hand shaking so hard he could barely unsnap his holster. He hauled his pistol out and stuck it toward the salesman's chest.
"You stop doing that stuff!"
he hollered, barely able to hold on to the pistol. Geraldine was reminded of Barney Fife and his case of nerves. Uncle Willie stood up suddenly. Wally Enfield thumped to the floor like a rubber dummy.
"I've known me some judo,"
he shouted to the salesman, and assumed an odd stance.
"Take me on, Snakebite."
The salesman turned to look at him, laughing. Breaker coupled his hands together to form one huge fist and swung out hard, as if he held an axe. When it connected, the salesman's nose broke with a wet little snap, but he only turned his head and smiled. "At long last," he breathed, and clamped both hands around Breaker's neck. He lifted him an inch or two off the floor. "You've been lucky for too long," he sneered. "I hope you like what comes next." Geraldine looked around for a club, an ashtray, any kind of weapon. There were chairs, but they would splinter in a heartbeat. There were the curtain rods, but they were flimsy aluminum. "Remember Quebec?" the salesman crowed. "Remember Seattle? Remember all the times you should have been dead?" Geraldine spotted the oversized key. She dropped to her knees and crawled under Breaker while he shook and gobbed above her. It was heavy and cold. She staggered to her feet and swung it back like a knife, intending to stab it somewhere in the salesman's face, maybe his eye. "Goodbye, Breaker," the salesman said, and squeezed his hands tighter. She drove the key toward his face with all of her strength. An arm swung out and blocked the blow. She careened backward. Breaker had done it. Though she had fallen on her butt, her arm was still a captive to his hand. His face had turned from blue into purple, and a thin line of blood slid from the corner of his mouth. His eyes, fixed on the key, were bulging so hard she thought they must pop out. His hand slid down her arm to her hand. He jerked on the key, jerked again. Geraldine let him take it, stunned and bewildered.
"Fuck you!"
he gurgled and mashed the key against the side of the salesman's face. The salesman screamed. Long tendrils of steam hissed out from under the key. He dropped Breaker, but the key was still welded to his face. He pranced and whooped, slapping at it as if it were a wasp that could sting and sting again. As Breaker wobbled to his feet, the salesman peeled the key away. New steam and smoke burst from his fingertips as he did. The key clunked on the floor and lay there with strings of flesh boiling on its edges. This cowboy salesman staggered and reeled to the nearest window, both hands clutching the side of his face. With the clumsy backward leap, he crashed through it. Cold wind and wet rain blew inside, billowing the curtains while shards of glass crashed on the floor. Choking and retching, Breaker crawled on his hands and knees to where the key had fallen. When he had it in his hand, he rose to his knees and stuffed it back into the leather pouch that Sheriff Tupper had belatedly found hidden under his clothes. Uncle Willie, Irene, even Cordelia, and tonight's lover Roach slowly stepped to the window. On the floor, Wally uttered a groan that everyone ignored. "Don't!" Breaker gasped. "Not yet!" He clambered to his feet, one hand swiping away the blood from his mouth and chin. "It's not over," he said, his voice cracked and rasping. "It's never over." Irene emitted the strange strangled noise. "Look at what he's doing," she whispered. "Look!" Geraldine stumbled past Breaker to get to the window. Irene's porch light was only an $8.99 Kmart special Geraldine had picked up in Avery, and then installed for the bitch. But the porch light its 40-watt bulb cast was enough. The salesman extended a hand, grinning horribly to his audience, which now included Breaker. A window full of faces, Geraldine thought, and wondered how many of these faces would be left if the salesman got back in. Nobody could hit like that. Nobody could punch a fist through a living skull, unless maybe they are wigged out on drugs and totally insane.
"Damn it," Breaker whispered. "Just like before."
She was about to turn her head to comment on this, ask him when and where the hell the befores had happened, when the salesman shouted, "It could have been easy, my good people. It could have been a simple matter of giving me that key." He let his gaze bounce from face to face in the window, as if memorizing each one, finally settling on Breaker. "You must be so dreadfully tired after all these years, Breaker," he said, "so horribly, dreadfully sick of it all." Breaker said nothing, but raised the pouch so that the salesman could see it.
"Not as long as I'm alive,"
he rasped through the aching knot that was his throat. "It starts again tonight, and it will end like it always has." The salesman looked off to one side, shaking his head. "Humans! Ugh, you're not even worth the flesh you're printed on. Even I grow weary of this. By the way, fuck this cowboy shit." The salesman ripped off his Stetson and his duster and threw them to the ground, and did a parody of a square dance on top of them, driving them into the mud, as he said in an exaggerated southern voice, "You bunch of ho-dunk, po-dunk, well them there motherfuckers! All you had to do was give me the goddamn key!" "All right. This property is hereby condemned." Lightning flashed nearby, and in the tick of time it took for the thunder to report in, Geraldine saw his face illuminated. It was twisted, somehow pointy, wicked, scarred badly by the application of the antique key. Had he been wearing a mask, she wondered? She remembered a movie that they had shown in the women's prison about a year ago. A film where this guy could make artificial faces. She had liked it enough to write her sister about it, asking that she send the book, if there was one. For a moment now, her mind went gray. False faces like in the book and movie? Or was this even more sinister than that? The salesman held up a hand, and Geraldine watched as he extended his other hand to the one he was holding to his side. A trace of light gleamed off his moving little finger, where a pointed fingernail that seemed as thick and yellow as a talon grew. With it he rasped his skin of his palm in the shape of a cross, and held it out for them to see. "Behold!" he hissed, and punctured his palm with the talon. A drop of dark blood peeked out. With a hard and purposeful swipe of his hand, he carved his entire palm open in a single deep line. Bob Martell slumped backward against Geraldine. "So damn much blood," he groaned. "The sheriff, oh God, the sheriff!" His eyelids fluttered. Geraldine wormed herself to the side and let him thunk to the floor, her eyes still on the salesman and his hand. He cupped his palm for a moment while blood formed a pool in it, watching it with an almost motherly expression of concern. He snapped his head up and his crazy grin came back. Again, lightning stroked the sky and cast harsh light over him. "Ask Breaker why you're about to die," he shouted. Over the following clap of thunder, he said, "Ask Breaker!" He swept his hand to the side and tipped out a small bit of his blood. It splattered on the gravel and was instantly washed under by the rain. "Arise, friend," he intoned as if in prayer. At that spot in the gravel, a strange lump bumped upward with a crunch. Wet rocks tumbled lazily from its peak. Geraldine barely had time to blink before the earth underneath the spot erupted into a geyser of dirt and mud. Some wet, syrupy thing burst up, hurling more dirt and a spray of mucus aside. In that wink of an eye she saw arise, crouched and newborn and blinking stupidly in the rain, a guy in a cheap rubber monster suit. What the hell, she wondered? What the... Author's Interlude by T.C. Keeper. Hello, kiddies. Was that cool or what? Rubber monster suit. R-U-B-B-E-R. Monster suit. According to Lesson 2 of the famous Dead Writers course, it is important to keep the reader wondering what will happen next. I'll bet that none of you expected the salesman's blood to bring guys in rubber monster suits out of the ground. Took you by surprise and made you want to read more, didn't I? Truth is, Geraldine only thinks that they're monster suits because never in her life has she laid eyes on a real demon. But she won't be thinking it long. Demons come in many shapes and sizes, yet they all have one thing in common. They love humans. Love them rare, medium, or well done, that is. Since we're taking a break, why don't you go ahead and peek in the fridge for something to snack on? If you can eat after reading about Sheriff Tupper's latest headache, or go use the bathroom if you haven't already soiled your undies. Myself, I'm taking my typewriter to the cemetery to work on the plot! Okay, boils and ghouls, this has been Chapter 5 of Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight. Gotta say, this is my favorite part of the movie, favorite part of the book so far. Gotta love the collector when he sheds his cowboy stuff and just lets it all out. So yeah, the cops showed up with Mr. Salesman. He wanted his antique. They tried to give it to him. He wouldn't touch it. Things got suspicious. And, I thought the salesman would lose his head, but apparently the sheriff couldn't keep his cool and lost his head. So, anyways, I'm not the Crypt Keeper. I can't do the puns. Great chapter. Great book so far. I'm really looking forward to the rest of it. I'm noticing a lot of little changes to the story here, and a couple big ones. I'm sure y'all have noticed too. I'm curious to see how much of it's going to be different than the movie. Really? There's not a whole lot more I can say, Ho dunk, po dunk, well them there motherfuckers. Best part of the movie, best part of the book by far. The demons have been born. They have risen from the ground, and this is where things get interesting. So, I will see you soon, Fright fans, with more of Tales from the Crypt Demon Knight. And when I do, I think it's going to be a wild ride. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, okay, kiddies, thanks for listening. Pleasant dreams! And we'll see you real soon.